Hello, class. We're going to talk about World War II on the home front in this slideshow. You see on the first slide there's an image of an advertisement for rationing, and then there's the Rosie the Riveter image that was also an advertisement for women to go into the workforce, which was very unusual. I'll tell you about that in a minute. So the thing to know about the transition from the Great Depression in the 30s to World War II in the 40s is that World War II spending by the federal government ended the Depression. And I mean, it was within 1 year's time, and in many industries and locations faster than that. So we go from having not enough jobs for the people who need them to having more jobs than we have people to fill them. From people that are homeless because they can't afford their home to people that are homeless because they moved to California or someplace where there's a new military industry and there literally is no housing for them to live in. So it goes from one end of the extreme to the other end of the extreme. And the interesting thing about this that's important to know is that everything that was done during the 30s by President Roosevelt, by Hoover before him, which wasn't much, but Roosevelt, went all out to try and fix the economy and end the Depression. Well, nothing did that. His programs helped people stay alive. They helped people. They put a little bit of cash in their pocket, a little bit of food on the table. They were beneficial for helping people's everyday needs, but not everybody's everyday needs, just as many as they could possibly do. But it did not fix the economy. The economy was broken, and the only thing that fixed it was the shot in the arm that World War II beginning in Europe gave it. So the scary part about that is we don't know how to fix the economy when it crashes. Capitalism is not logical. It is not predictable because it's run by human beings. Everything that human beings runs is screwed up at some point in time. Sometimes, worse than others. So that's the lesson of the Great Depression. The federal government, did a lot of additional spending to try and help people and jerk the economy out of the Depression, but it didn't work. It didn't happen. So that's just something to remember about capitalism. It's and communism same way. No system is perfectly predictable because human beings are involved and there's a lot of unknowns. Okay, going on to the next slide. So we go from bust in the Great Depression to boom almost overnight. The United States federal budget increases tenfold. That's from $9 billion in 1930. Got $9 billion today, wouldn't even build the Pentagon. $9 billion in 35 to $100 billion at the end of World War II. That's a giant leap there. Never seen anything like that before. Incidentally, federal spending during World War II makes the federal spending during the Great Depression look minuscule. I mean, there's hardly a blip on the radar in the Great Depression compared to what the federal spending was in World War II. And I'll be talking more about that here in a little bit. So we see the largest expansion of the federal government during these 4 years of war that the United States was involved. Businesses are once again going to be under federal mandate to produce war material. So, for instance, Buick is now making airplane engines. They're making Jeeps. General Motors is making tanks. There's no automobiles manufactured during World War II because all the automotive industry has been ordered by the federal government to build things for the war effort. So, and that's true across the board for manufacturing. Some of the automobile industry are now building parts for airplanes. The airplane industry explodes in Southern California and Arizona and Nevada because it's great flying weather out there all the time, 365. You can test planes. So that was a big boom for that part of the country there. So businesses are guaranteed a profit again, just like they were in World War One. They're manufacturing things on government contract so we can fight the war. And the opposite of that, or the other side of that coin, is going to be that workers are also being paid high wages. This is now regulated by the federal government for wartime, because if you can't get the labor force on board for the war, you can't win the war. So unions are legal and encouraged, and all kinds of benefits are given during the war by federal mandate to employees. So they will work as much as possible. There's overtime for over 40 hours a week. There's time and a half for Sunday, I believe it is, and there's double time over 40 hours. So people are raking in the money. You go from being broke and not having any food to having more money than you could possibly spend in a day. Very, very unusual. People are going to save a lot of money during World War II, and that's what leads to the economic boom that continues in the late 40s and early 50s, because there's so much money in savings when the war is that, remember, the troops are getting hazardous duty pay because they're in war zone, and the people on the home front are making good money, and everybody is needed in the workforce. I'll talk more about that in a minute. So there's all this money coming in to families, but there's not a whole lot of consumer goods being made because everything has been converted onto the war production. So, and even if there were things to go and buy, you don't have time. You're working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and maybe 7 days a week. Remember, you just came out of poverty in the Great Depression, so you're just loving this. You just, want to get it all, rake it all in, because you don't know when another Great Depression might hit again. So people are very, very focused on making money and saving money. That's going to be a great thing for the 1950s. We're going to have ration goods. Now that's food, mostly food, sometimes some other goods that maybe aren't so much sold to consumers but to manufacturing is going to be rationed to make sure that there's enough to go around. And I'll talk about that as we move forward. So let's go on to the next slide. So women are going to go to work in the war effort in numbers that we've never seen before. Now, this is not a new situation. Women have worked in the workforce in every single war, even in the American Revolution, when the husbands or the family, the oldest male in the family, left the farm or left the store or whatever their business was and went off to war. The women stepped in and ran the store, ran the manufacturing, ran the farm. And then when the husbands came back home, the women went back to doing domestic things. So it's not unusual, but the scope of it is unusual. And the jobs that women were doing in large numbers is very unusual. So because we have a labor shortage now by 1940, we're trying to the federal government is trying to encourage anyone who can work to please get a job. We literally bring hundreds of thousands of Mexicans up from Mexico to take the jobs, unfortunately, generally jobs that whites don't want, because farmers are dropping their hoes and their rakes and they're joining up, or they're going into work at the aircraft carrier shop or the shipbuilding yard because they can make 5 times the money. So somebody's got to grow the food. Lots of that is going on in every single industry you can imagine during World War II. So the women in the workforce are going to increase 60% across the board. Now, they came to be called Rosie the Riveter. It's just kind of a catch-all name. We think of it as applying to women who are actually riveting metal, which is what this woman in the upper right corner here is doing. That's a bomb, and she's riveting. A rivet holds 2 pieces of metal together and is put on with an air gun that literally jams it in there and then bends the back of it around so it can't come back out. So they're doing jobs that were traditionally made for men. But Rosies were also spies. They were also secretaries. They were also in communications. They were in every job in the military that men were doing. Women were doing those things also. And we kind of now include them all in the umbrella of Rosie the Riveters, because they're all women in the war effort. One of the unusual things about these women is that they were older. These weren't 18 necessarily, 18 and 20-year-olds, single women who were traditionally the ones in the workforce until they got married, and then you were fired or you went home to take care of your husband's house. Now these are older women because their husbands are off fighting the war, or they're also working in the war industry in factories, and so we still need more workers. So older women with children are going to be pressed into service in these industrial jobs. This becomes a problem for them because these women have got children. We're not used to seeing a large number of women with children in the workforce. So it creates problems for a lot of these women, like what to do with the kids when you're at work. There is no daycare. There are no child care facilities at all. If you need your child to be taken care of, you hire your next door neighbor's teenager, or your niece or your nephew or something like that. It's worked out informally in a babysitting kind of contract. So that's fine if you find someone that you can trust and you're willing to do that. Oftentimes, women are moving from all over the country to cities where we have mass war production going on, especially in California, in Chicago, in Detroit, in some of the Toledo, Cincinnati, where the old steel mill manufacturers are. Women are going to work in those places, and they move with their sister or with their cousin or with their best friend, and all the children go. And then the women get jobs. Someone works the first 12 hours of the day, and her roommate or her friend works the second 12 hours of the day. So there's always somebody at home to take care of the children. But this could be a real problem. And I've read stories where women were desperate for something to do with their 6 and 7-year-old when they went to work. They felt obligated for the job because it was helping win the war. So one lady chained her children to the table leg of the kitchen table with food and water. And it sounds harsh, but she said, well, this way I know that they won't burn the house down. And when I come home, they're still going to be where I put them. So that it was for their own safety. I mean, that's an extreme example, right? But this was a challenge for women. A few of the defense contractors that were building in the shipyards were the federal government paid them to offer child care. But there wasn't very many. I didn't cover, a tenth of the female workers that needed child care, but it was something. 25% of the shipyard workers, those are on the West Coast, are women, and 50% in the aircraft industry are women. Now, if you stop and think about those numbers, you'll realize that without those women stepping up and going to work, the United States could not have produced the ships and the airplanes we needed to win the war, because ships and airplanes are getting shot out of the sky and blown up every day. So it's, in fact, the devastation of the Pacific Fleet was so bad from Pearl Harbor that it took till 1944 for our shipbuilding capacity to reach pre-war levels. So we're playing catch up for the first 3 years of the war, trying to build enough ships to fight the war with. And a lot of those ships are aircraft carriers who also have planes. So this is a fly by the seat of your pants kind of situation. There was never a guarantee that the United States would win this war. Now, I want you to think about that. When you're living in a moment, and this is a good example today, we're living through the coronavirus pandemic worldwide. Do we know where it's going to end? Do we know how many people are going to be infected? Do we know how many people are going to die? Is this going to be every day now from now on until a vaccine is created in another year? We don't know what the future is, right? Those people in World War II didn't know either. Right? You've got to keep that in your mind when you're studying history. They had no idea what the next day was going to bring. And we're literally fighting for our life in the early 40s because we're fighting on two fronts, in Europe and in the South Pacific. Okay, these posters I love. This one guy sitting here, working man, obviously eating a sandwich next to the woman that's working with him now, and he says, "Good work, sister. We never figured you could do a man-sized job." Well, it's because they never gave him the chance, so no, they didn't know that. And then the other woman, "Women in the war, we can't win without them." This lady riveting the bomb. And that's what historians have discovered by researching this period of time after the fact, is that if women hadn't gone to work, we couldn't have won the war. So something to think about. This is a classic picture of Rosie the Riveter, painted by Norman Rockwell, 1943, at the height of the war. You can see that she's pretty beefy looking there, and she. I mean, this is a. I don't think you can see my cursor, but this is the air gun that she's holding on her lap, and there's the hose that goes to the generator, or the source of the pressure. So she's muscular. She's in dungarees, like a denim jumpsuit there, so working clothes. She's wearing her face covering goggles. Uh, she doesn't look like a woman there, really. I mean, she doesn't look like the typical 1940s woman. And he kind of does, in my opinion, he kind of does her a disservice by making her look mannish. Because women did not develop this kind of muscle from their jobs in the war industry. I mean, some may have, but no more than a man doing those jobs, and they're not all, Arnold Schwarzenegger just because they work in the defense industry. So I think he's overdone that a little bit, but the point he's making is that women are stepping up when the need arises in the emergency situation. And this painting was painted in 43. When it was sold at auction in 2002, look at that price tag, $4,959,500. Now that's extreme, even for a Norman Rockwell, who's like, Mr. American's painter, artist. The reason that painting sold for so much was because those women who had provided that wartime service were dying in 2002. Their generation was passing away, and there weren't very many of them left at that time. It was kind of a wake-up call for America, especially for historians and journalists, that OMG, these women are dying and nobody's talked to them. We haven't got their stories down. So that was a national aha moment, that we needed to get these women's stories down. And today, because of jumping on the ball at that time, we've just got thousands and thousands of these women's experiences. Unfortunately, they're told from old age. It would have been much better to interview them immediately after the fact and find out what their feelings were about it at that time. Anyway, this is the Liberty ship, the ship that these women built. And you can see it's not a very big ship. It doesn't have any offensive capabilities, no weapons on it. It's a cargo ship. It just carries supplies from the supply base out to the field, wherever it's supposed to go. In 1941, before the United States entered the war, it took 70 days to build one of these Liberty ships. By 1942, after Pearl Harbor, 5 days. 5 days to build these ships. Now, they learned how to make them fast, and they literally were thrown together because chances are they're not coming back. They're unarmed, they're cargo ships, they're sitting ducks, and they're going from the west coast of the United States all the way across the South Pacific. They're going to Hawaii, they're going to the Philippines, any place there's active fighting going on. These are the resupply ships. So they're just going to get blown out of the water all the time. And they did. So they had to make them fast. And 2,700 were built over the next 3 years. So it's an amazing story. And these ships were built almost exclusively by the women on the West Coast in those shipyards. Moving on.